Mark has offered to stay, chosen to stay, has chosen to stay with us, but also has offered to take any questions that that the representatives here have, and so I'm more than happy to facilitate that. And I see one. Well, we'll take one straight away.
So, first of all, Mr. Malloch-Brown, it's a privilege to see you again. Last time was in Washington, and I always admired the work you did at the United Nations. And I would like to ask a question relevant to the UN. You know, I appreciate your comments on Durban and the fact that you were there. I wonder if you know, Abe Foxman, just a few moments ago, probably gave the most sobering assessment of the status of global Jewry that I have ever heard. You know, his worry, his concern, never since, you know, that terrible time have we seen a time such as this. And Durban could be more, you know, flaying more gasoline on the fire, it seems to me. I'm hoping that the United States does not go and makes it clear as to why we're not going, despite the fact that the PrepComs might show some promise. And you said, you know, you want to coordinate that with the U.S. But my question is, not only on Durban, but the Human Rights Council was supposed to be the institution that would follow on the egregiously flawed Human Rights Commission, which every year had Israel in the crosshairs and was nothing but a hate fest. I went to it almost every year and couldn't believe how the demagoguery was just everywhere. It was anything but a human rights meeting. The Human Rights Council has followed on. Knowing the UN the way you know it, what would be your, and our London Declaration does call on the United Nations to take certain actions, what would be your recommendations to all of us as we talk to our respective governments, our ambassadors at the UN, on not just the Human Rights Council, but all the treaty bodies which have it in for Israel and do nothing other than one day of an anti-Semitic, Combating Antisemitism conference, have not been part of the solution. They have been part of the problem in a very, very large degree.
Congressman Smith has been a long-time friend of all the development programs I ran at the UN, and it's a delight to see you in London. You see, we do it quite grandly here, you know. Used to those canteens we used to meet at in New York and Washington. Let me just say that, you know, both Durban and the Human Rights Council, in a sense, you know, point to the core choice we have in terms of engagement strategies or staying out of bodies. You know, I have this, you know, profound view that human rights at the UN has only worked occasionally, very intermittently, but when it has worked, it's above all else been because of American engagement. You know, Eleanor Roosevelt is the founder of the whole international human rights presence in the United Nations, and you know, there was, and for years the US, you know, championed the promotion of human rights, the pushing of political and civil rights. I think it played a critical part in the final collapse of the old Soviet Empire. And while the UN was a minor part of that, it was more human rights organizations in Europe and the US who allied with people like Jan Kavan and others made this happen. The fact is, the umbrella of the UN, the international legitimacy of its embrace of human rights, was enormously important to the civil society activism that took place under it. And, you know, now we face a situation where the US did not come into the new Human Rights Council, and in some sense left us who were in badly handicapped, because without the voice and the authority of the US, we frankly, you know, our case was less to make. And, you know, I can't resist, this was a source of much dispute between myself and your colleagues at the US mission in New York, but, you know, it was actually a huge frustration, because the US kept on appearing to say it would come in if its conditions were met as to what this new Human Rights Council would look like. And one of them was, we hate large talking shops, keep it small. And the problem was, by keeping it smaller than had originally been planned, we cut down on the European representation. which had this unintended consequence of giving the sort of Arab-Asian bloc a much bigger numbers than was expected. So, there's been an unfortunate undermining of the kind of liberal African, European, Latin American set of countries that had traditionally, and North American, which had traditionally, been, if you like, the voice for good sense on many of these issues. So that's a very discursive answer to saying that on both, I hope America will come back into the Human Rights Council, seek a seat, fight for the things we mutually believe in, and when it loses, then we have to think again, but it's not given the institution a chance by engaging. Similarly on Durban, I think it's right to come to the review conference, and I think we need to combine to lay out absolutely clear bottom lines. There cannot be a situation where one country is singled out at Durban. It's absolutely impossible that only one country is mentioned by name. And there cannot be references to anti-Semitism as some special kind of, the whole issue of Zionism, rather, cannot be singled out as some special form of thing separate to anything else. And so we've got very clear bottom lines on this that we and the US will want to meet. And if we don't, we will not be able to accept the conclusions of that conference. But I think it is better to get in there and fight for what's right. And if we can't prevail, then we have to follow the logic and step out. But I think we have to give this a try first.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. There's no question at all that Durban was a stacked deck, and Durban will be a stacked deck based on the membership. Canada decided to withdraw. It was the first country in the world to do so. I understand the situation in the United States. I'm very close to our American colleagues, and I know the debate is now going on in the administration. I doubt if they will withdraw because of a number of issues. We heard last night from Foreign Minister Frattini, which was a welcome to our right. So tactically, we're politicians. So what do politicians do in the face of insipid evil? Using the Bush phrase that people don't like to use, but let's use it to make the stark difference. Well, one of the things we do, and one of the things we've suggested in Canada, is to establish counter-conferences, take the agenda, move the agenda to a fairer forum, and we are planning one. One is being planned now in New York at Fordham University for the same period of time, taking the same agenda and doing it properly, and hoping that the world media that is here will listen to the two voices, the voices of the dark side and the voices of liberal democracy. Our colleagues at in Congress are now contemplating participating in such an event while still going. Canada believes in engagement. We've engaged with China before anybody else. We've engaged with Cuba before anybody else. We believe in engagement. But in this instance, sometimes when the line is crossed, you have to now come up with alternative strategies. So what do you think about establishing, while you intend to go, if not, counter-conferences that are properly organized, like this conference, which is, I think, a balanced, fulsome conference addressing the problem. The United Nations Commission is stacked. 2/3 of every resolution that came out of the United Nations human rights thing since 1947 have been directed to one country, Israel. It's not right, it's not fair, it's not balanced, it's not liberal, it's not democratic, and so on. So in every instance, they failed. And when an institution fails, what do? Do you go back and try to repair it when you cannot, without re-engineering? Or do you try to do something alternative without diminishing the effectiveness of the United Nations, which in many instances is a light onto the world? But in this instance, it's a darkness. So how do we address that, Minister?
Well, I think, obviously the Human Rights Council was an attempt to address it, which has so far been very disappointing in its consequences. But it was exactly that. It was a feeling that this inbuilt bias, this politicization of human rights had to stop. I think the danger of believing that you can operate in